cortege slowly, steadily, here approaching the cenotaph.
The National Memorial of Remembrance for all those who have died in war, the annual ceremony which Queen Elizabeth attended every year of her reign until the very last. The Major General commanding the Household Division passing the cenotaph now. And on the side of the road are the veterans' organisations led by the Royal British Legion. See on the right of the screen.
Procession now passing the cenotaph, where every year on Remembrance Sunday, Her Majesty has laid a wreath to the fallen. On top of the coffin you can see beside the imperial crown, the orb and the scepter, a wreath of fresh flowers. It's a wreath that's made up of flowers that were taken from Buckingham Palace gardens, the gardens of Clarence House and Highgrove. And tucked in there among all the flowers is a sprig of myrtle. And that's a sprig that was taken from a plant grown from the sprig of myrtle that was in Her Majesty's wedding bouquet in 1947. making its way up the Mall towards Buckingham Palace, where the staff of Buckingham Palace have come out so that they can make their own very personal farewell to Her Majesty as the procession and the coffin go around the Victoria Memorial and up towards the Wellington Arch. And we can see there the young Prince George with his sister Princess Caroline following slowly behind this solemn procession as it makes its way around the Mall and out towards the Wellington Arch.
Nothing.
procession is now making its way under the arch that will lead out onto Horse Guards Parade, the place where Her Majesty has reviewed her troops every year in the trooping of the colour. It'll cross Horse Guards and then make its way out onto the Mall. background, Big Ben tolling every minute to mark this procession on its slow and solemn journey. The thousands that have been lining this route, have been silent until now. We just heard them once burst into applause, but now you can hear them applauding again as the cortege passes out onto Horse Guards Parade. The coffin of Her Majesty flanked there by the King's Guard. The Honourable Gentlemen at Arms, the Royal Company of Archers, the Yeomen of the Guard, all taking station alongside the coffin. It's their role to protect the monarch in life and in death, and so they march beside the coffin just to ensure that nothing untoward will happen to Her Majesty or her coffin as she makes this final journey. It's a journey of just 1.7 miles, what, about 3 kilometers? But it's going to take almost half an hour to reach the Wellington Arch because of the slow pace of the march, as the sailors continue to pull the gun carriage all the way to Hyde Park Corner before they hand over the coffin to the royal hearse. Immediately behind the gun carriage and the sailors who are guiding that carriage now out towards the Mall, we have, of course, the royal party. His Majesty the King, the Duke of York, the Princess Royal, Princess Anne, and the Earl of Wessex. Behind them, Peter Phillips, husband of Princess Anne, the Duke of Gloucester, and the Earl of Snowdon, the Queen's nephew, the son of the late Princess Margaret. And behind them come the cars, the royal cars that carry the Queen Consort with the Princess of Wales and those two little ones who sat through this service with the kind of extraordinary, solemn dignity that you would not expect from a 9-year-old or a 7-year-old. But what an extraordinary day for them. Behind their car, we have the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle, along with the Countess of Wessex, Sophie, who was seen as a surrogate daughter to Her Majesty. She spent so much time with her. And indeed, Sophie referred to Her Majesty as Mama. They will follow very slowly in their cars all the way to the Wellington Arch, as the men of the family, along with the Princess Royal, continue that slow, slow march through the crowds who have gone silent again. And the bell, Big Ben, still tolling to march and to mark every step along the way. The Household Cavalry also now in this procession, the Blues and Royals there, and later we can see the Lifeguards. The Royal Heralds in those extraordinary costumes, a tabard made from the Royal Standard, the quarters of the Standard, the Harp of Wales, the Lions of Scotland, the Lions of England, and the Quarter for Ireland. And now we can see that iconic view, the length of the Mall, with Buckingham Palace at the far end. The Coldstream Guards following the procession. The band of the Royal Marines in there, playing that slow march. coffin is now at the far end of the Mall, making its way up the length of that incredible road, flanked not just by thousands of members of the public, but also the Union Jacks, the Union flags. And as the cars and the cortege make its way towards the Victoria Memorial, we know that staff from Buckingham Palace have flooded out at the end of the ceremony, at the end of the funeral, which they were no doubt watching on television in Buckingham Palace so that they knew when the service was over. And then they flooded out into that area in front of the palace so that they could come and stand by the railings and be there in position to make their own personal farewells to Her Majesty when once the coffin goes around the Victoria Memorial and then heads up Constitution Hill. They're very emotional. Representatives of the Royal Australian Air Force Reserve, Royal Australian Army, the Nursing Corps are also marching in that procession. We also saw earlier members of the Royal Ulster Constabulary. They were marching behind the Scots Guards. You can see there, just sticking out of the top of that wreath on top of the coffin, a note. Now, I think we all remember that when Lady Diana had her funeral, there was a single note which just said, "Mummy," which had come from the children. We've not actually been able to say what that note says, but as the flowers came from the royal palaces and that it was the King's decision that that was where the flowers would come from, it's more than likely that that note is a personal note from the King saying farewell to his mother, our Queen. You have members of the Royal Navy and the Royal Marines who are lining that march up the Mall as we pass the statue of the Queen's late mother, the Queen Mother Elizabeth. And behind the statue of her father. None of these things, though, I think, are being noticed by the royal party who are marching so solemnly behind the Royal Navy and the coffin. Their eyes are very firmly ahead, their expressions of deep concentration and thought. This is their mother that they're saying goodbye to, their grandmother, the most important member in their family. And there you can see the public are clapping now as the coffin passes by. This is their expression of emotion, their expression of love to the Queen.
We'll let you know as soon as we can.
Blues and Royals now bringing up the rear of this procession. Those breastplates now glinting in this autumn sunshine that is now beginning to bathe the capital. much earlier during the day that this is a spectacle that I think no other nation in the world could ever stage. There's pomp, there's ceremony, there's pageantry, there's heritage. It's all there. As the gun carriage carrying Her Majesty the Queen comes in front of Buckingham Palace. It's going around now the Victoria Memorial. You can see in the background there the white-tented city, the media city, the thousands of people that are being able to watch this as a result of international coverage of today's funeral. We know that something like 2 million people have come to London to witness this. We've been told the unimaginable figure of some 4 billion people are actually watching throughout the world. And here in Britain, we know that 11 of our major cities have set up large screens in public places so that people the length and breadth of the country can go into their parks, into their public spaces and watch the whole ceremony. 150 of our cinemas are playing this live on their big screens, and all of those pubs that would normally be showing football or rugby at a national level, they are also now carrying this funeral procession so that virtually everybody in Britain can watch, even if they don't have the privilege of being here in the city, to see the cortege pass in person. Certainly a day for Australians today as well, because you've got representatives of detachments who are marching from the Royal Australian Army Ordnance Corps, the Royal Australian Infantry Corps, the Royal Australian Engineers, the Royal Regiment of Australian Artillery, and the Royal Australian Navy. It's a wonderful opportunity for servicemen and women from all throughout the Commonwealth to be part of this unique, very, very special occasion. The 142 sailors from the Royal Navy pulling the carriage, pulling that gun carriage, with a group in front taking the weight, a group at the back acting as a brake to make sure that they keep that solemn pace throughout this 3-kilometer route.
Yes, exactly.
The whole procession is due to reach the Wellington Arch at 1300 hours, at 1 o'clock. That's when the bearer party, the Grenadier Guards once more, will lift the coffin from the state gun carriage and place it into the state hearse. But I'm looking at my watch. It's 1 o'clock already, and they're not there yet. All of that wonderful, wonderful planning and timing that was done by the Earl Marshal, the Duke of Norfolk, everything timed to the second. But the funeral service itself was slightly overrunning, and this cortege is taking, at this slow, slow pace, I think even longer than they anticipated. Tell you now that the card says, in loving, I'm sorry. I can tell you now that that card that has been placed amongst the flowers in the wreath on top of the coffin says, in loving and devoted memory, Charles R. The first time we've seen publicly Prince Charles use the signature. We're so used to seeing E.R., Elizabeth Regina, but now Charles Regina, with that very personal message from him to his mother in that very personal wreath of flowers. Not Charles Regina, my apologies. Charles Rex, of course. And there it is, you can see it very clearly now. I think we can see there, lining the route of the cortege, members of the armed services, including Royal Naval personnel, Royal Marines, Wellington Arch, waiting to receive the coffin of Her Majesty the Queen. From the Wellington Arch, once it's loaded onto the royal hearse, the car will make an equally slow journey from central London out through the suburbs towards Windsor. It's a journey that's going to take 2 hours. One that would normally take barely 45 minutes, but because, once again, this whole ceremony is planned to ensure that as many people as possible are able to see the coffin, to say their personal farewells to the Queen, that it will travel so slowly. That's how long it will take. But meanwhile, those members of the royal family who are travelling by car, and indeed the royal family that are following the cortege on foot, will transfer to cars which will take the much faster route along the M4 motorway to Windsor, so that by the time the coffin arrives, having taken that journey up the long walk towards Windsor Castle and the chapel within the grounds, they will already be there waiting for her. So from approximately 1:15, once the coffin procession and the King's procession have both departed from Wellington Arch for Windsor, the bells of Westminster Abbey will ring fully muffled throughout the afternoon, something that only ever occurs after the funeral of a sovereign. We see there the band of the Coldstream Guards. His Majesty the King walking behind members of the Royal Navy. His Majesty himself wearing the uniform of an Admiral of the Navy. He did, of course, serve as a member of the Royal Navy. He did his time at Dartmouth Royal Naval College, where all young men who want to become officers in the Royal Navy are trained. He spent a year there and then went off as a captain on a frigate. Princess Anne also wearing the uniform of the Royal Navy. She's a Rear Admiral and she's also commander of the Portsmouth Division. think we can see there the full majesty of this moment. 142 Royal Naval men carrying, pulling the royal coffin. The King's Guard standing guard to ensure that the coffin and Her Majesty arrive safely at their destination, and members of the royal family behind. The King, the Princess Royal, Prince Andrew, and Prince Edward.
We want to pre-write this. Would you be happy to wait for the book? Back up. Where is it? Where is it? Okay. Would you mind bringing him in and asking him ideally
When they reach the forecourt of Buckingham Palace, the King's Guard will turn out. They will give a royal salute as the coffin passes the Queen Victoria Monument. The staff from Buckingham Palace lined up, ready to say farewell to Her Majesty. Staff in that building of some 700 rooms, men and women who have served as in the kitchens, who have served as housemaids, as butlers, as dressers, as housekeepers. The people who have served Her Majesty the Queen for so many years, given the opportunity now to actually say goodbye, Your Majesty.
All right.
What memories they must have of Her Majesty. Many of them having probably 20 or 30 years service within Buckingham Palace. Others perhaps much younger, with only a few years, but every one of them coming together now, joined in a determination to say farewell to their monarch. the cortege, and the King's bodyguard guarding the Queen, coming past Buckingham Palace and turning now into Constitution Hill. That royal standard that has shone like a beacon, the yellow, the orange and the blue, so distinctive and so easily spotted from afar. And Big Ben continues to toll that sonorous tone as they continue on this march towards the Wellington Arch. Not one of them breaking step. Passing now the end of Buckingham Palace where the Queen's private apartments are. In that wing, right behind the gates that they're now passing. And this, of course, is the final time that Her Majesty will be passing Buckingham Palace. But today has been a day of finals. Not just the final time past Buckingham Palace, but the final time that she will be taken through the streets of the capital. The final time that she will make that drive to her home out at Windsor. The final time that the thousands lining this route will be able to see Her Majesty and say their own farewells. As I watch them all walking so solemnly, I do wonder what is going through their minds. Remembering, taking everything in, storing it away, so that they will have these memories for as long as they live. Every one of them, whether they're marching in this procession or standing on the sides, on the pavements, behind the barricades. On a personal note, my late father, John, was a Royal Marine, and he walked in the procession for the Queen's father, King George VI. He was part of the Royal Marine Division that actually took part in this ceremony. And I know that he had amazing memories of the day. And I'm sure every one of these men and women that have marched today, that have been in Westminster Abbey, that managed to make that long wait in the queue to go and pay their respects in Westminster Hall, what memories they will have, what they'll be able to tell their children and their grandchildren about the day they attended the Queen's funeral. Just yards away now from Hyde Park Corner and the Wellington Arch, where the royal hearse will take possession of the coffin, take responsibility for it on its final journey. And there you can see the Royal Horse Guards Artillery in Hyde Park, waiting to give their final gun salutes. Departs Wellington Arch in just... As the hearse departs Wellington Arch in just a few moments' time, the parade will give a royal salute and the national anthem will be played. After that, the King and the Queen Consort, the Prince and Princess of Wales and members of the royal family will then depart for Windsor by car, and they'll be followed by those who are to take part in the Windsor procession. And of course, when once they get to Windsor, there will be 800 people waiting for them in St. George's Chapel. These will be people who are not part of this procession, were not in Westminster Abbey. They are mainly members of the royal households who will themselves be waiting to see the final stage of today's quite extraordinary funeral. It'll be their opportunity to say goodbye to their queen. There'll be a public service, we'll see that televised, where the Queen's coffin will be lowered into the royal vault, and at that moment, that will be the last sight that we have of her, because the service that will follow that later today at 7:30 here in Britain, GMT time, that will be a very, very private service, in which the Queen will finally be interred with her mother, her father, her sister, Princess Margaret, and of course, the man who has been lying and waiting for her for over a year and a half, the man that she shared her life with for 74 years, His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh, her loving husband. Beside the coffin, we have the King's Guard, and it's made up of not just the Royal Company of Archers and the Yeomen of the Guard, but also the Honourable Gentlemen at Arms, those men who are wearing those helmets with those absolutely virgin white plumes in them, which are made out of swan's down, and they are the only members of any military organisation that are allowed to wear those. They are so distinctive. Prince George we can see again there, with his sister, Princess Charlotte, his mother, the Princess of Wales. Taking it all in. My goodness, doesn't he look like his father when he was a little boy? Of course, when they reach the Wellington Arch, that will be where they will pass by the war memorial to the Australians, that remarkable piece of architecture that's in Hyde Park Corner. point of pilgrimage, I know, for many people who come from Australia to visit the capital. Most of the royal ladies are in the cars following, but of course Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, has broken with tradition. She is walking with her brothers. Now, this isn't something that we've ever seen before, but then Princess Anne is a unique woman, a very special woman. She knows her own mind. She's her father's daughter. She wanted to walk in this procession, which she has done. In fact, on every occasion when her brothers, when the king and her two brothers, Andrew and Edward, have walked in procession, she has been there with them. And there we can see the armed forces, the bands that are waiting at Wellington Arch to greet the cortege as it arrives at the end of the road. I think I can see there the band of the Coldstream Guards. And the Coldstream Guards lined up. They can hear the music. And in fact, just in the distance there underneath the arch, I can see the start of the procession as it arrives. Lined up, ready to receive the cortege. Just coming under the arch there, the outriders at the head of it. Scots Guards are already there waiting at the arch. The Wellington Arch that we're referring to stands right in front of Wellington House, that used to be called Number 1 London because it was the home of the Duke of Wellington. And the arch is there in commemoration of the Duke of Wellington, of the terrific successes that he had as head of the army, particularly, of course, during the Peninsular Wars in the 1800s, culminating in the defeat of Napoleon in 1812 at the Battle of Waterloo. He was the darling of the British people. He was one of Queen Victoria's prime ministers. And the nation wanted to honour him, not just with the beautiful house that stands just behind the arch, but with the arch itself. The King and Princess Anne, side by side. She's going to be really important, I think, in the future of the King, because she and her brother, the King, are very, very close. And rather like the Queen Consort, she is a wonderful support to Charles and will continue to be so. So they've arrived at Hyde Park Corner, making their way now towards the arch itself, where the royal hearse will be waiting. They will take possession of the coffin. They will be responsible for it now on the final leg of today's journey. Passing right underneath the arch now. party. So the procession comes to a halt, having gone underneath the Wellington Arch. This is the moment now where the bearers will take the coffin off that gun carriage and carry it with great care to put it into the royal hearse. And in the background there you can see the Australian War Memorial. The King, Princess Anne, Prince Andrew and Prince Edward standing to attention. Behind them, Prince Harry, pause now after that long march as they wait for the band to stop playing, for the hearse to arrive, and for the Commander-in-Chief of this part of the ceremony to give the instruction for the bearer party to take the coffin and place it inside the royal hearse. His Majesty the King, looking pensive and solemn. Will remain on the coffin during the journey out to Windsor. It won't be removed until the end of the service in St. George's Chapel. During this moment of stillness, the armed forces from the Commonwealth, including Australia, standing to attention and watching and waiting. His Majesty the King and members of the royal party now moving away from the coffin. Everyone else still and silent.
Thank you.
armed forces of the Commonwealth on one side of the hearse, and now the bells behind me, the bells at Westminster Abbey are chiming, announcing the fact that Her Majesty the Queen has been transferred to the royal hearse, to the state hearse. His Majesty the King now getting into a car. He and other members of the royal family will now travel by car via the motorway to Windsor, while the royal hearse will itself take the much longer and slower journey to ensure that that iconic view of the Queen's coffin, draped in the royal standard, the imperial crown, the orb and the sceptre on top, and indeed that wreath of flowers from the royal gardens sitting on top with that personal message from His Majesty the Queen to his beloved mother. Outriders, heralding the fact that behind them comes the royal hearse. At the start of its journey through the Royal Horse Artillery, there on the left of your screens, the horses nodding, almost bowing their heads as the hearse passes in front. And that will now be the start of this 23-mile journey, some 40 kilometres from the centre of the City of London, out through the west of the city, out towards the suburbs, where we know thousands are already waiting, lined up, as they are here in the capital, to say farewell to Her Majesty the Queen. That royal standard makes it so easy to see the coffin. And the crowds now cheering, applauding, as not just the hearse, but also the cars carrying members of the royal family, His Majesty the King and the Queen Consort in the lead car. The outriders now on their motorcycles just pulling in behind, as this now motorised cortege makes its way out of the city.